Welcome to Thrive, the podcast. Happy New Year to everyone listening in to this new episode of Thrive, the podcast. I'm delighted to kick off 2024 in conversation with Elroy Spoonface Powell. Elroy shares his journey from domestic violence through to hitting the big time in the music industry with a number one hit, collaborating with UK house diva Lisa Millett, to working in movies from Star Wars to Fighting With My Family alongside The Rock, Nick Frost, Stephen Merchant, and building his career as an award-winning voice actor, including roles in the gaming industry in hits like Minecraft and others. Elroy shares what drove him to create multiple businesses in and beyond the entertainment industry, to include raising awareness and helping people in the corporate space with mental wellness, and becoming an author of beautiful books for boys between the ages of 5 and 12, and his journey to becoming a married man with lessons from his martial arts mastery and Dave Chappelle along the way. This is a rich and inspiring conversation that fills me with happiness just to listen to it. And it's also wonderful to share this great conversation with you to start the new year. Elroy, welcome to Thrive, the podcast. It's lovely to have you here.
Very much.
We met some years back as co-authors on a book project that we collaborated together with a bunch of people on. But since then, and even before then, you've had this quite stellar career in a lot of ways that you have created yourself, starting in the music industry, moving into acting, being an award-winning voiceover actor, a mindfulness consultant, and also an author of these incredibly beautiful books for boys. It's not an area that has been given a lot of attention before now. It's like now people are starting to pay attention to the emotional and mental well-being of boys in a much larger way. So I love to share your journey with our listeners, but also I just want to let everyone know that we're doing a giveaway on this podcast. And so stay to the end, listen to the episode for your chance to be the receiver of that giveaway. Yeah, so Elroy, I would love to know about your journey. Where did you begin in life? What was life to you before you discovered your path?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to share today, and I appreciate all the great work you're doing. It's been a very interesting roller coaster that I'm grateful to be on. I grew up in North London, in Tottenham, in the 80s, where there was a lot of overt racism, but I had a household full of a mix of love, domestic violence, and loud music that shaped my ideas about the world. I didn't come from a lot of money. My parents came up from Jamaica at a young age, and I didn't recognize how empowering that story would be until I got much older. And I went to a school in North London, did a bit of uni, and then got into the music industry. And please feel free to ask me anything as I skip from place to place here. But I had, I think arrived in the second year of a law degree because I wanted to be a lawyer. I think just growing up around seeing some of the injustice, the racism, just how hard it was to do things as a kid, it felt right to go in that direction. When that time came, I got an opportunity in the music industry, and the music connection came from my dad, especially because growing up, reggae music, soul, funk, bass lines were just the soundscape of my youth. He grew up in the sound system culture, had a youth sound when he was a kid. And as he took on the responsibility of contributing to raising a family, that was one side of things he didn't want to let go of. So we had very large speakers in the house and a living room no one could go into because there was so much vinyl at the time, taking up most of the space in the room. And it's where I got an education on music, on reggae especially, And I just remember at times somehow trying to do homework with the house shaking from how loud he played his music, and whether it was inside or in his car, you knew my dad was coming because you could hear him before he turned up. He had a love for music. It was his way, I recognize now, of dealing with some of the pressures of life, just dealing with the challenges that no one really prepared him for, especially at that time.
Mm.
So beyond the music industry, my creativity took me into different spaces, acting, voice acting, and especially now writing books for young people, traveling loads. Right now I'm in the Caribbean and enjoying it and really learning loads. And in a nutshell, I just grew an appetite for exploring myself, exploring how to connect deeply without letting go of who I am, and allowing myself at the same time to evolve and step into that space of who I am and who I become for now.
Mm. Were you always looking for that, even through those years of growing up in the family home, that sense of questioning, the environment you found yourself in? I mean, it sounds really eclectic and fun on one hand, but also really challenging on the other. Growing up in domestic violence isn't easy. What were some of the beliefs that you formed about the world and life that you started out from?
Well, like with any kind of trauma, a lot of it was subconscious, and it was only as an adult, as I started to explore myself more, that I started to unpack
Mm.
what became my perception of the world, really. So I recognize now, looking back, that a lot of it was from frustration and not knowing how to communicate. And, I'm not creating excuses. It doesn't, you know, permit anyone to hurt anyone. But when you're a child and you see the people that you love the most hurting each other, or especially one hurt more than the other, you start to think that's how it is for everybody. You start to think that also that your voice doesn't matter, that you're not seen or not heard. The times when I'm saying stop, don't do this, don't hurt my mum, or why are you shouting and so on, and you're just ignored.
Mm.
You recognize that in other spaces, if people ignore you, you feel triggered, and you don't know why sometimes. But the biggest thing really was I I I honestly was struggling at uni because I didn't know. I had a child at the time, and I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know. It scared the life out of me.
You
Yeah,
became
became a dad at 19. I really didn't know what to do. Like, I had a lot of support, don't get me wrong. Like, my mom especially was just amazing. My dad was different. My dad kind of he enjoyed the idea of having a grandchild. Actually, both of them surprised me. I thought I was just going to get, a lot of harsh treatment, but they had me at roughly the same age. I had very young parents. They wanted better for me, and that was the sort of challenge. And when I say better, I don't mean it's not a good thing to have children, but they know the struggles. You know the struggles of raising a child when you don't have a steady income,
Mm.
and you're still learning about yourself and about the world. It's tough raising a child, and you don't get a manual. So,
Mm.
that there was so much going on that really made me so really stepped up my drive. I felt like I was always quite driven because I enjoyed learning. I just love it. I love soaking things up, especially when they're interesting to me. Yeah. And so, yeah, I really, having a child young, even as scary as it was, added to my drive to just do as much as I could. So by the second year of uni, when I got this opportunity to join this electronic dance music group, it blew my mind because I initially was just doing it to make a little bit of money to raise my child and get through uni. But
Mm.
then it turned out to be much bigger than I thought it would be. Straight in at number one, thanks to Lisa Millett, who at the time was signed to a label called Defected Records, and just an amazing UK house diva. She
Mhm.
was my mentor and took me off to Italy to vocal the song with the producers, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But my it was quite short term. I was thinking just yeah, make the money, make as much money as I can from this session, and then go back. And then it became more of a feature, and me having to do live performances and travel in private jets up and down Europe, and going from being a scared, broke student to that experience was mind blowing. But then there was so much politics around that. And I remember having to literally move back to living with my mum, just sleeping on the floor because at the time the house was full. My brother was there with his partner and so on. And it was lovely. It was cozy. You know, we cook for each other and just have a great time a lot of the time. But I had to start again in a lot of ways. Well, I perceived it to be starting again, but the difference with if you are at a stage in life where you've experienced a ton of things and you have to start again, it does feel like you have nothing. But the truth is, you have probably the most valuable asset, which is experience, life experience. And I had by the age of well, by my mid 20s, I had so much experience having gone through the record industry at a high level at the time I didn't recognize that it helped shape my ideas for other things. So actually my approach for releasing books and everything else is like back in the day when I used to print up white label records and go to shops and try and get radio support and so on, and you find a specialist that can support what you're doing. I actually use the same principle for sharing my books, and you know, you slowly recognize that all of your skills are transferable. At the time, y- it becomes a part of you. You think that I have to be a singer. I have to be, you know, joined to a major record label, and this is my identity. And whenever we have our identity challenged, it creates conflict, internal conflict, especially as you think you're losing yourself and you're losing who you think you are and who everyone else thinks you should be. When you can let go of that and just recognize what is bringing you peace and how to use your skills in different places, it becomes a lot more enjoyable. And then I found I've been able to stay open to wherever it's going to take me and
Mm,
not worry so much. And, you know, I end up in places where I'm often the only person, or there are very few people that are like me, either look like me or have my skill sets or interests and so on. And I have to just represent myself and connect to myself and be who I am and just trust. You know, I when I was a teen, started doing a lot of martial arts, Muay Kwan, Taekwondo especially, and I always have a lot of respect and time for my martial arts family from when I was young, especially because they really helped shape a sense of just believing in yourself. One of
mhm,
the things our instructors used to say was you should be able to go anywhere in the world and hold your own, whether that's as a martial artist or just as a human trying to survive this new environment that you might have been dropped in.
mm,
And that's something that's always stayed with me.
mm,
And you know, I'm a person like anyone else. You know, what I can do, I believe that anyone else can do, and vice versa. If it's something you really want to do and you put your mind to it, you work hard to develop the skills, it will be slightly different because we are all slightly different, and you have that unique element to who we are. But that saying has really stuck with me. And so taking it back to your question about domestic violence, as tough as it was to witness and experience, it helped me with gaining a sense of power, a sense of recognizing that if you're not being seen or heard, that it's time to leave that environment. It's hard to do when you're a kid, but when you're an adult, you often have more choices at times. Or, you know, the other thing was to recognize also that your world isn't just what's happening externally. I think I had to develop what you call it, a state like a mechanism for protecting myself, an ability to sort of just go in,
mhm.
go in a safe way
Yeah.
to not allow whatever's happening externally to negatively impact my safety and you know how I felt and what I was doing at the time.
Yeah, for sure. There's that inner world, and realizing that what we cultivate internally actually has so much more power, but we have to give it agency through our actions, through, putting ourselves and choosing the environments that we're in once we have that ability to do so. So it sounds like through this journey, you also developed a huge amount of flexibility. And I want to touch on that because you see, it's not that common actually, in this time we are living in an age where people have access to entrepreneurship in a way that they didn't before. So they, being a creator in the landscape that we have today with all the tools available to us is completely different from being a creator back then. So the trajectory of safety was that you go get a job and you get a steady wage, and when you're in that structure, you don't learn to create because you perform a role, you're paid monthly, your salary's coming, you can plan ahead, a year or two in advance, knowing that you've got this steady kind of income that guarantees your life. But when you're in a creative orientation and structure, you're responsible for the entire deal, from the clients that you work with to the type of work you take on, and so on and so forth. So, it sounds like whatever went on with the record deal put you in a position where you had to start creating, and the opportunity for you to just go get a job as a lawyer was off the table. That was no longer your path. So tell us a bit about embracing the flexibility in your in what you ended up creating, because you've created some incredible brands of your own as you've gone on this journey.
Thank you, and thank you for the reminder, because there is an element of just doing stuff and moving on. I was watching actually Miles Davis, the documentary, the biopic on Netflix the other day, and his son was talking about how he made there's hardly any of his new music in the house. He would just make stuff and then move on to the next thing. And I feel growing up, my parents are from the Caribbean. My parents are from Jamaica specifically, so I grew up around people just not having a lot, but making it work.
Mm,
Everything was about adapting. Everything was about making the most of what you had
mm,
to get ahead, and definitely that mindset rubbed off on me.
mm,
So I, when we talk about flexibility and all these different things, I think I just flow with it because it feels right, and rather than just sit there and do what everyone else is telling me to do. Now, don't get me wrong; it doesn't mean that I ignore positive critique. It's so useful to have mentors and coaches and so on. But in terms of ultimately making that choice about your next step, it comes from a place of me really trusting what I feel from the inside out. In terms of the music industry, even prior to the pandemic, a 2019 study by a Swedish platform, I think they're called Record Union, highlighted that 73% of independent musicians struggle with mental illness, which rises to 80%
yeah.
when you're only looking at people between 18 and 25. So what I found in the music industry was it was an environment, it was an unhealthy environment a lot of the time. And there, you have the 27 Club, which is really a list of unfortunate people, musicians, artists that died at the age of 27, and people are self-medicating and there's stresses, and ultimately what happens in the music industry especially is you're projecting an image. You're often not being yourself, or you're doing for others more than you're doing for yourself. And so because you're people pleasing, ultimately it's like one of the highest levels of people pleasing,
Mm,
there is the potential for so much conflict and letting go of your sense of worth, being
mm,
worried about losing access to resources and so on if you don't get another hit single. And we look at Capaldi and Avicii, and there's so many examples of of how the stress can really impact your life. And so I learned quite quickly that as much as I love making music business at times can be a place that I don't want to be, because it's just not healthy. So where else do I want to go? And
mm,
so recognizing the importance of pausing for a moment, even if you don't want to, something's going to make you stop. You're either going to be burnt out, depleted in
Mm,
some way, and you'll have to stop. And that came for me when I went back to my mum's house and had to sleep on the floor. And I would just be staring at the ceiling for hours at night, going, what on earth happened? I was just on private jets traveling about the place. And
mm,
then because I was forced to connect, and because of my experience with martial arts and meditation, and just meditation just as reflection and being in the now and being aware, I thought, wow, okay, I need to do a few things differently if I want to have a life that presents a sense of peace to me. I have to reframe some of the trauma I went through as a kid. I have to explore how I can move from this place to a place that I want to be in. And what does that mean for me? How do I develop myself enough to be ready for this change? And
mhm,
what skills I already have that can be used in these other places as I'm moving forward. And then I spent a ton of time signing up to supporting artists, agencies, being on sets. And I'm talking about I would be on set for about 3, 4 in the morning and spend hours there as they prepare to then by the afternoon be just walking up and down in the background to present a shadow for what's really being recorded in the main bit of action. And again, internally at times I've been thinking, why am I doing this? I was on private jets traveling up and down. How am I now doing this and not getting paid much? And then I had to again explore reframing this whole thing of not being seen and not being heard, and that it's just part of a stepping stone to another place. And then years later, I end up doing parts in films, fighting with my family, where I was a wrestler with Nick Frost, Stephen Merchant, and the Rock's in there, and all this kind of stuff. And get another film, Jingle Jangle, did a piece in there. Massive Christmas film, a film directed, film called Pirates about the London UK garage scene, and just sort of going from having to start again to having the opportunity to do those things.
mhm,
It just constantly reminds me that even when you are successful, even when you've done something you perceive to be the thing, be prepared to have to shrink sometimes. We're constantly shrinking and growing. But the point is to create your own definition of success. I'm not going by anyone else's. I have my idea about where the next milestone is, and I have a route that I can see and sometimes can't see, but I know there's a milestone there that I'm headed towards, and so I'm going to do whatever it takes. If
mm.
that means turning up at 4 o'clock to pretty much be non-existent.
You've also been in video games as, quite prominent characters and voiceover. So it might have seemed very small at that time that you were doing it, but actually, if you look at it now, it's actually developed quite significantly.
Yeah, but what I was heading to with why I share that, and please excuse me, I'm gonna have to tell another story for it to make sense. My wife surprised me with a trip to New York and tickets for Dave Chappelle at Madison Square Garden, recording his Netflix special. It was great. We are having a great time in New York, and the Dave Chappelle himself is doing what Dave does, and he's telling these stories that you don't know where they're going to finish at. But then he drops this really profound statement, and it was something like, bear with me as I try and recall it, but it was something like, sometimes you have to know when to step back and recognize when it's somebody else's time to shine, and that you're simply there to support their dream. The
Mm,
point is, those things where I'm a background artist or supporting artist,
mm,
it's okay because everyone has their role to play, and it's still important.
mm,
Even if it is just a shadow, it's
mm,
still important.
mm,
But it's someone else's dream. Somebody else has pumped millions into financing this thing
mm,
because they have a dream and a vision about where to go. So I learned three things really. I got reminded by that. Check your ego,
mm,
and check your healing. Gauge where you are with your healing, because maybe that's more a trigger from when you were younger, feeling not seen, not heard, not valued, and so on,
mm,
and not allow that to interfere with you. But
mm,
check your ego. Is it stemming from a place of fear? How can you reframe? Two,
mm,
everybody has a role to play. What's the value you add, and where do you fit in the process? You
mm,
can stay and give it your best. Or if the alignment is not there, leave. That's okay too. You just have to make a decision, make a choice, and then you accept whatever comes with that choice, and that's just what it is, and you keep it moving. And the other thing that really came from that is give yourself permission to dream bigger than big, no apologies. And
Mhm.
people will doubt you, and you may have to sleep on floors, and you
Mhm.
may doubt yourself. But
Mhm.
dream, that's where it starts. Start to visualize it, really start to smell it and soak it up and feel it like it's already there, like you have it already, because then subconsciously you start to move in that direction. You start to head there. And when you get there and you've even passed there, you don't even realize sometimes, unless you're stopping and consistently checking in with yourself around the sense of awareness. But
Mhm.
do the work and don't let anything or anyone interfere with that vision. And that's just from that, it was like a reminder and instantly checked me. And again, I was like, hold a minute, I was sleeping on my mom's floor however many years ago. Now look at where we are, look at what we're doing. And look, and more importantly, look at how you feel.
Mhm.
Look at how you feel. And that's what's really priceless. We're told that you don't mean or you're not valued anything if you don't have money.
Mhm.
And you know, that's something I really encourage, especially young people, to really look at differently.
Mhm.
Yeah, you need money for things, and it's great, and
Mhm.
it helps you with survival. But it's more than that. So
Yeah.
more importantly, what are the parameters around your own personal idea of success for you,
Yeah.
and how does that evolve over time?
Yeah, really valuable to check that, money is only, I've said it a couple of times on this podcast, money without connection is void of value. And what that means is essentially if we're not coming from the gifts that we have inside of us, it doesn't matter how much money you create out there because you won't be connected. You won't feel in yourself connected. It's possible to have a lot of money and feel completely numb, completely disconnected from your innate gifts and your creativity. And essentially, what I've learned is you don't need money to create. It's nice, but it's not what makes the creation at at the point of conception, as it were.
Absolutely. Some people will say, I'd rather have money and be miserable than not have money and be miserable. But the point is, how if you already figured out how to make a ton of money, or you've been able to create some success, or from your own definition of success in a particular area, if you take the money away for whatever reason, and we've all seen billionaires lose tons of money, you still have the experience. You still have the knowledge, which is priceless. So you
Mm,
can start again and get to
mm,
get to wherever you want to get to financially, if you're kind enough to yourself and patient enough to
mm,
get there. The
mm,
thing that you can't replace is your mental wellness,
mm,
and your health and other things, that no money can buy.
mm.
And it's just looking at that.
When you are living with no money on a consistent basis year after year after year after year, that has a price as well, and that when we look at musicians and what musicians go through in particular, it's the fact that it's not just the music industry, it's the lack of consistency for people, not just in music, but anybody in a career where, there are fluctuations. So it means that you're not part of a company receiving a steady paycheck. You're in a position where things are up and down, up and down. You can't count on it over time. That can have a massive impact. But you seem to have created a way that's really worked for you so that you are not subject to the forces of that kind of fluctuation.
Yeah,
And it makes you a super creator in this respect. You've actually gone, okay, I'm completely generating everything I'm creating from my own self. Nobody's handing me a paycheck here. I'm creating it, but I'm going to create it in all these different areas.
yeah. And
Yeah.
thank you for highlighting that for several reasons. One, you know, it's almost like, for a long time I was doing the same thing, expecting a different result, and we've heard that saying. And so, if you're able to check in with yourself on a regular basis, be honest with yourself. This is not working. This by itself is not working. What
Mm,
else do I need to do? Do I need to get more skills? Do I need to get a mentor? Do I need to look at other business? And when I started to connect with mentors and start learning a bit more about sales and business and marketing, I started to realize that actually I need to create multiple streams of income. And then I don't have to worry about just relying on music. So now I'm still involved in music. Now I'd license music to airlines and I have albums going on BA and wherever else for in-flight entertainment. And as you said, I'm a voice actor, so I'm doing video games. Dying Light 2 and Minecraft Legends, and I'm acting and turning up in films, and I'm making books, and everything. I just realized that it was so important. I'm doing corporate mindfulness. All the areas that I love and feel I can make a difference in, I decided to turn into a business somehow. So I didn't just have to rely on one income, but no one told me that. I had to really seek it out. And again, that
mm,
came from doing stuff. It wasn't working in the ways that I wanted or needed it to. So what else can I do? And I think what happens is sometimes those musicians or those people who stick with it, they get caught in this trap of one, not healing themselves enough to recognize when it's time to move forward and to let go or to evolve,
mm,
but two, thinking that you just have to, there's like a spiritual, I'm an artist, no, I'm an artist until I die kind of thing. I have to do this one thing.
mm,
And you can, but the truth is no one's holding a gun to your head
mm,
making you do this. So
mm.
if you end up in a bad way because you're not being honest about where you are with how things are in your music business, then you need to change things.
Yeah. So you were honest enough, and that in itself is 90%, I feel, that because it can be so easy for us as human beings to live in denial. There are things that we don't want to see or we cannot see, especially when we have unaddressed trauma. It particularly can really render us, fixed in our position or our fantasy, as it were, not really seeing reality for what it is. So you built out incredible things, but tell us a bit about the details of that, because I guess you didn't just snap your fingers and have 12 different things you're doing in the world. There was a period of creating and managing your life as you go about the creation of it.
Yeah, and I'll be totally honest with you, a lot of it really was a response to the requirements of the environment I've been in. So being here in Jamaica the last few years, being in the Caribbean, I recognize that I'm in a different phase, and things that may be available to me in the UK, I might have to go to America for or whatever. But in that moment, it made sense to focus on putting out books more and actually releasing music again a lot more for different things. And I'm doing a lot of I'm writing a lot of audio plays and playing like tons of different characters in them and working with different people. So they'll slowly start to emerge, but that's because I'm in one place a lot of the time, or I'm sort of bouncing around a region that often doesn't have available to me what I would have in London, for example, in the ways that I have it. So it really a lot of it, aside from dealing with healing from trauma and so on, it's about being honest about what's available to you, what resources and what opportunities are available in the environment you're in. How can you then adapt to make that work? And the great thing is having access to the internet, especially for some of the industries that I work in. That really makes a difference. But hey, in Jamaica, Ian Fleming, did Bond, and I actually being here, I could feel how that, I could feel how that
Yeah.
happens. You just the weather's great, and you just the pace of things change, and it's like I'm just gonna write. I'm just gonna let the flow, let that happen, and go with it.
How would you feel about creating short children's movies, animated movies out of your books?
I'd love to, and that's actually something I'm working on. I wrote a book recently for young people, and a lot of them is about mindfulness and encouraging conversations with parents, teachers, children about emotions. And again, growing up around a lot of domestic violence, seeing people you love fighting a lot. And then as a child, especially back then in the 80s, being told all the time, be quiet, children must be seen and not heard. There was still a little tail end of that when I was growing up. I wrote a book called A Lion Must Roar,
Mm,
and to encourage children to be proud of their voices, to recognize they have a voice. And I felt I had to write a book like that, being a voice actor too. But we're just told we're silenced so much, even in this world where we're overstimulated by social media and all that is available. Find your voice and allow yourself to explore it. And it's not just about getting angry and shouting. You know, that roar can be a gentle whisper. It could be reassuring and loving. It could be so many things. Just whatever you feel is required in that moment. But you know, I speak to adults going through challenges, and one of the things they tell me is I didn't feel seen or heard, and I didn't feel I could say what I wanted to say when I was a child.
mm,
And I recognize that, you know, I recognize that for myself too.
mm,
And I had to write a book about that. I had to just share, you know, just every now and every now and then, a lion must
mm,
roar, and let you, even if no one else hears you, don't be afraid to say it, so that you hear you. Like, listen to yourself and
mm.
trust the external and the internal voice.
Mm, yeah, that's beautiful. And I guess what I noticed about your books as well from the artwork is that you're addressing the Black community in a way that hasn't really had too much in the realm of books and media. That's, because predominantly in the West, it's very white centric focused. So,
Yeah, and you know, I'd like to go a bit deeper and uncover that. You know, for me,
yeah.
it's actually it's not me actually focusing my books on the Black community. It's about representation. I grew up and I didn't see as many books with children that looked like me, and so I wanted to explore the children looking more like me, and I didn't want to make books that were bright and colorful and to a degree like a lot of the books I saw growing up and exist now. There's nothing wrong with that. But my world growing up was a lot darker. You know, England, England, especially around this time of year, was grimy and dark. And we still had to find a way to be happy and play and have fun, and we did. So I wanted to express that. I wanted it to be dark and wet and almost a bit scary, um, but still say, you know, love yourself,
Mm,
breathe, you know,
mm,
let your voice be heard. All these things I talk about, it's okay to
mm,
cry, you
mm,
know, explore these things. And, you know, because the challenge I have with saying also, these books are for Black people and to address Black issues is it's that term Black is so outdated, it's unbelievable in my opinion.
mm,
It's meant to capture a ton of people that culturally are so different. People from the Caribbean are very different to people from East Africa, are
mm,
very different to people from South Africa. And then does it change if you have white skin, but you are several generations in a part of Africa, but you are dark skinned and you live in a council estate in London? Of course it is. Why are we still basing
mm,
this definition on the color of skin?
mm,
So there needs to be this redefinition of what it means to be of African descent, why it matters, and culturally what the differences are,
mm.
um, and sort of go from there. So yeah, that's really been my thing. For me, it's more about representation and seeing someone that looks like me with an afro when I
Mm.
had one,
Mm.
and brown skin.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of beauty in all sorts of different cultures around the world, right? All types of nationalities and races. And yeah, we're not even touching the tip of the iceberg when it comes to representation, not just with color and nationality, but in terms of abilities and, all sorts of areas that can be explored and generating more for one another in that acknowledgement. Another string to your bow is that you're pretty much a social media king in a lot of ways. You're very entertaining on social media. You've also got an agency that can provide those services to clients. So it's another one of your businesses. How did that happen?
Again, I got tired of gatekeepers. I got tired of just people not understanding me, man. And so I just thought, hey, just do whatever, you know. And And when you see there are just so many people on there doing whatever makes expresses who they are, it was
Yeah,
important for me to just connect in the ways that I like to connect. You start to build your tribe.
yeah,
The people that get you will over time
yeah,
um, be drawn to you.
yeah,
And so yeah, just and then I figured out, yeah, I can actually turn this into a business, and there are a few clients that I assist with
yeah.
building their own presence online and so on to push their products and services. You know, and I want to just say, in terms of representation, real quickly, it it's still important for me at the same time to connect with my culture, my cultural experience through my parents. I grew up in the UK. I'm proud of my experience as a British person of African descent. And being in Jamaica, especially, I've been able to connect with the roots of my parents in a way that
Mm,
has helps me connect a lot of dots. I've understood now why sometimes my parents just talk so loud. They grew up in the sunshine, mostly outdoors, because you're not going to be indoors when it's so hot, and when you grow up, you don't have AC, you don't have a cooling system so much. And then people are over bankings and they're growing up in the countryside, and you're talking loud and you're communicating in a totally different way to being cooped up in a house with central heating on. You don't need to be so loud. It's
mhm,
it's a whole the environment's different. So of course people are going to be different. But then historically, when you look at the the transatlantic slave trade, and you look at how Africans got to the Caribbean, got to Jamaica, and the Maroons, and how they had to fight the Spanish and fight the Brits, and all of the uprisings and the rebellions from the plantations in Jamaica that gave people a sense of fighting for their life, fighting for their freedom, and not being afraid to have that fight. And you start to recognize how important that is,
mm.
and to find a way to connect with that. And when you think about business and other things where people don't understand you and don't get you and want to put you in a box, how important it is to be ready to stand your ground, to communicate your boundaries,
Yeah,
and define who you are in order for you to grow in the ways that matter to you.
yeah, yeah, that's so true. That is not the time to back down. Yeah, beautiful point that you make. And that starts by being connected to our inner world and our inner voice before that confrontation or that opportunity even shows itself, right? To know ourselves, to know what we value and what lights us up and what fulfills us, rather than taking that cue of what might fulfill us from the outside world, for example. Because your path, each person's path is unique, is different to one another. And if we try to follow someone else's path, we will never really receive the fullness of who we truly are and what we have to offer and what we have to give. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just love the fact that you're creating children's books as a mother of two sons. I remember, going through all my son's childhood books with him, and he was like, no, keep that, keep that, keep that. They become really treasured memories for not just yourself as a parent, but for your kids as well. That those stories plug us into the magical moments of our childhood in ways that, especially when the environment or the situation at home is grim, it's a lifeline, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I if you had told me, 10 years ago that I'd be writing children's book, I look at you very strangely. I, I Again, it's down to transferable skills and recognizing that whether you're writing a song, you're telling stories, and I really wanted to see how I could share my story in a way that I felt was useful to children and
Yeah.
to parents and anyone looking after children, because I just think that I wish I had these conversations growing up. You
Mm.
know, you're told, again, if you hurt yourself and you cry, stop crying. Well, I was told, like, stop crying. Especially for young boys, it was about being as tough as you can because the environment was tough. But if you are tough all the time, and I learned this from martial arts, it makes you more likely to break. You can't be rigid. You can't just be all the time. You have to find a way, yin and yang, to be
Um,
fluid and move between hard and soft.
This is vital. Let's just talk about this for a minute, right? Because there is this you know, systemic thing with men. You know, I grew up believing men didn't even have feelings. I didn't discover that until a lot later. So it had a massive impact on my perception and behavior.
Yeah, when you come across statistics like, oh, 6 million men suffer from depression, 14 and a bit percent have a form of anxiety, and so on, it's a real thing. I believe that, again, there's no one size fits all because it depends on the environment you're in and so on. But yeah, the men I saw around me growing up were very testosterone fueled and quick to, they're very mercurial, very quick to get angry and aggressive. And I thought that was the way for a long time. And like I said, I feel like if I didn't do martial arts in my teens, I would have had a different maybe outlook on that, because I saw men that were dangerous, straight up fit and strong and capable of causing harm, be very gentle and warm and loving. And what happens is when you can get, listen, don't get me wrong, you have to know how to defend yourself. You even if you're not massively proficient, you don't have to be a soldier or you know, a marine or anything like that. But I'm saying that you have to be willing to stand your ground and protect yourself. And the better you get at, or the more confident you feel around that, it allows you to feel safer. And the safer you get, the less likely you are to entertain or get involved in unnecessary conflicts. So I feel a lot of the fights, a lot of the challenges people come from fear, men feeling afraid. And so if you can create spaces where men feel okay with being afraid and okay with feeling vulnerable, you're less likely to have what happens on the other side, the violence and the lashing out and the depression and the anxiety in the same kind of ways. So, you know, even when it comes to relationships, we talk a lot about, and rightly, women feeling unsafe. Women need to also make their men in the relationships. If you're in a heterosexual relationship, you need to know how to make your man feel safe in that relationship, and it's going to help massively. And we don't talk about safety and men feeling a need to be safe and what happens when men don't feel safe.
Mm. Yeah, that's a beautiful point that you raise. I want to ask you a couple of things. I want to ask you how this has informed your marriage, but even more than that, I want to touch on this is also a journey I had to go a little bit into with how my mother was in her marriage with my dad, and then not knowing how to communicate, not understanding it at all, and having to learn that part
Yeah.
in terms of creating receptivity, being receptive, and how quickly, if a man is not even leading in himself, that immediately triggers us as
Yeah.
women, kicks off our need then, because we step into the more masculine dominant role when we don't feel safe, cascades over to the man who feels violated because he's not being respected in his authority and his leadership, because he hasn't done the work to stand in that position. I'd love to hear your experience of this.
Well, in terms of getting married, I never wanted to get married. After having the experiences I had in early relationships and so on, I was happy being single, having a good time, knowing that I could. Because when I was dating, and I didn't really date, I just did things, went out and had fun with people. It wasn't like we're having a date, and then, no, it was never that. I was very honest and said, look, I don't want a relationship. You know, I'm cool with where I'm at, and off for some reason, sometimes that would make a person maybe be even more interested in you. But I was just very. It was important for me to be honest about the expectations. But then I met my wife, and I just realized several things. And just allow me a moment just to unpack this. I realized that what was stopping me also from getting into a relationship was I was afraid. I didn't want to be vulnerable and get hurt. And I think a lot of men are afraid of being honest about that.
Mm,
And so it's easy to just do everything else and not go to that place. But
mm,
then what happens, like we've been talking about transferable skills, is when you're afraid to love, if you're afraid to get hurt, you're going to limit yourself in not just the potential for a great relationship, but in all these other areas of life. It
mm,
will just become a way that you think and do things. And I
mm,
didn't want that to permeate my being.
mm,
So I just said, look, I can't control how that person's going to respond. I just have to be healed enough or continue healing so that I can see red flags and be honest about them,
mm,
communicate my boundaries, do the best I can.
mm,
But then when if I get hurt, I get hurt. Then you leave
mm,
and you heal and then you give it another go when you're ready. And you may never be ready, but just know that if I'm stopping myself doing this thing, it's going to have an impact in all these other areas of my life. And so by the time I was capable of recognizing that, Jenny came along and there was no intention to even get into a relationship. We were just having such a great time traveling and going out and talking for hours and hours and hours and being honest about all of the things that caused us pain growing up and all this kind of stuff. I just thought to myself, oh my gosh, it makes sense. It
mm,
just makes sense to just give this a go. And
mm,
Jenny said to me, I've done had long distance relationships, I've done this and that. Because Jenny was from up north or is from up north, and I'm down south in London at the time. I actually want something serious. And if that's not you, I get it. But this is where I am. So just, if you got loose ends and you want to give it a go, tie them up and let's connect and see what happens. And it was that maturity. She held the space for me to be vulnerable and the space for me to feel like, oh, this is a mature person, making it very clear where they are with things. And now I have a choice. I can make an informed decision. And
mm,
that in itself just made me go, okay, let's do this. And then it was about a period of time living together, and we had no choice because we ended up in lockdown together, me, Jenny, and my mum. Um, and so then I always believe that if you're going to go to that place with someone, you need to live together. You need to live together so you see what people are like when they're not trying to be their best version on a date or whatever.
mm,
And you go through some hard times paying bills and doing other stuff, and you go, okay, this is how you're going to respond when it hits the fan, and this is how we can create solutions when there's been conflict of some sort. You just get to figure out each other's love language, each other's apology language, how you like to resolve things. It's so important. So we did that, and it made sense. And at the same time, after all is said and done, if this doesn't work the way I see success and Jenny sees success, it's okay. All I want to know is that within this moment, I've done the best I can. We've done the best that we can to make the most of this marriage, of this relationship, of this connection, of this energy that we have, because that's all you can do, and
mm,
then just respond accordingly from there. And if you divorce and if you break up, you're not a failure. The alignments just change. It's just like in business. I don't want to sound too cold about it, but you still had success, you still achieved, made some great products and services and did whatever. But there comes a point that where things change, and that's life. I think we get so caught up in wanting things to stay the same forever when life is never like that. Things grow. If you just look to nature, things are changing all the time. So it's okay if your relationship changes. It's okay. You're supposed to change. It's okay if you change.
mm,
I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago. And why should I be?
mm.
So
It sounds like you've really taken it on with awareness, which is very different from entering a relationship where you want to stay how you are and you expect it to work. It's like you took your expectations out of the equation
yeah,
and started to live through awareness rather than expectation. And that's a very different orientation in a relationship. It does nurture, it allows things to blossom and to grow rather than getting stuck against sort of a brick wall when your expectations aren't met.
yeah, and I feel it's important for me to say that You don't have to be in a relationship, you know, but if you decide to have one, let go of the expectations.
Mm.
Equally, have conversations though about your vision for each other, your vision for yourself. I think a lot of people let go of themselves in relationships. No, say, no, I really want to get this out of the relationship. Is that something that you see as a possibility? Because
Mm.
then that's going to help me with the joint vision for both of us. You need to have that space for yourself,
And you need
and not
to have your voice, right? You've got to have your voice to be able to
have
even.
your voice.
Oh, that's gorgeous. Yeah, I love hearing you share your journey. It's really rich. Thank you. Really, really gorgeous.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. You mentioned at the beginning, the top of the show, that we're giving away a gift, some prizes. It'd be amazing to say, if you share this show and tag us, I will then put all the names in a hat and create some winners of one of my books and mail it out to you in the new year.
So you've got 3 books. I Breathe, A Lion Must Roar, and I Have Water in My Eyes. So if you're listening to this episode and you would love a copy of that for your grandchild or your child or a special child in your life, share this podcast episode and tag Spoon and tag myself. And then you can put in which book you'd love to receive. Spoon, thank you. I have one more question.
Sure.
Where'd you get the name Spoon from?
So back in the early days of my music journey, I felt spoon was right, because when you look into a spoon, you get something different coming back at you. And at the time, it's so important for me to not just be seen as a reggae artist or a hip hop artist, but for people to acknowledge I might get involved in some folk and be inspired by other genres, when it came to what I did. It's a very different landscape now. People are doing all sorts, but back then, people were very much pigeonholed, and especially at radio, it was very divided, between, I hate using the term, but urban music and everything else, and you weren't allowed almost to be into those other things. So it was very important for me to go against the grain and do that.
Mm, so great. Thank you so much for being my guest on this podcast. You've had an incredible journey, and also just being being a leader, just being a champion for the people that come into contact with you and love what you're up to in the world. So yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you, seriously, and nothing but the best for you going forward, and look forward to connecting again in
Yeah,
the near future.
thank you. If you loved this episode, share it and tag us to win the book of your choice. Elroy will mail it directly to you. Find our Instagram handles in the show notes to do this. Also, subscribe to the podcast to listen into more wonderful guests throughout 2024. Wishing you a very happy new year according to the Western calendar. Thank you so much for listening.